Okay, thanks, Linda. I'd like to welcome everybody to Growing Concerns for May the 29th. We'll get started here, and as usual, I'm going to start with a little bit of a crops update, go through a few things that have been happening over the past week. And then today we have Ron Rabe with us, who's the Western Manitoba agronomist from Monsanto, and he's going to talk a little bit about some of the issues that he's been seeing regarding planting of soybeans and some weed control, as well as some issues he's been seeing with corn and weed control. So kind of a timely update. A lot of guys are putting in the soybeans right now and corn, and starting to get quite a few questions regarding that. So with that, we'll get going here. And I guess one of the things we've been seeing quite a bit of this past week is a lot of machines sitting on the edge of the field. We did receive a fair bit of rainfall over the past 10 days or 7 days in the southwest part of the province. We've pretty much ground to a halt in a lot of the seeding operations. And looking into the long range, it doesn't look like we'll be getting much of a break from it. Today's not a bad day, but it's something like tomorrow they're calling for anywhere from 30 to 40 millimeters with high winds. So it's going to be a day where we can do a lot of bookwork in the office. I just wanted to keep you updated on the field at the winter wheat field at Shoal Lake. We've been watching this one kind of all spring so far. And this was the picture from last week for May the 22nd. So you can see that winter wheat is definitely starting to fill in then. And then here's the picture for this week. So that crop actually made it, one of the few that made it in the southwest and South Parkland area. And even over this past week, we've had fall rye fields that have been written off. So something that I haven't seen in a lot of years, where fall rye hasn't made it. And just accounting for the long cool spring we've had, and basically just the ability of those seeds that didn't germinate well last fall, not running out of energy and not being able to make it through the ground. So like I say, this one we'll be watching for a while yet, just to see how well it does, but it sure looks like it's filling in and it's going to make a crop. A little bit of an update. About 70% of the cereal crops are planted in the southwest here. About 60% of the canola, about half of the corn crop and soybean crop is in, and about 95% of the field pea crop is in, and probably closer to 100. With this, there are some areas where we've received some larger amounts of rainfall, and the percentages aren't as high, especially when you go south of Cirrus and get closer past to that Deloraine area and south, where they received larger amounts of rainfall over the past week or so, and they're probably another 10 or 15% behind these numbers. Earlier seeded crops are emerging, which is a good thing. It looks like the germination is really fast, and I guess that'd be a warning to everybody. Crops are coming up fast. With the rains we've been getting, it's pulled guys off the field, and we're going to see quite a few issues with guys that didn't get a burn-off done. We're seeing lots of weeds that are growing, and they're growing fast. And we're going to need to get into those fields and spray fairly quickly, because a lot of those weeds are getting big, and weed controls may be difficult in some of those fields. So depending on how much rain we get here over the next week or so, I encourage people to get out there and check your fields for weeds. They definitely are coming. We're seeing a wide range of weeds coming right now as well. As earlier on, we were seeing basically just some volunteer crop coming. And so that's one thing to watch for. The other thing is anybody that has winter wheat or fall rye crops that have made it, I would say that they're going to be needing spraying fairly soon. The canola, that when I was out in those fields checking a lot of the fields, a lot of the canola was in the one to two leaf stage about to middle or beginning of the week here. So by early next week, you're going to have 3-leaf canola, and once it starts to get a lot larger and start to cabbage out, we're definitely going to see issues with just the canola starting to take over a bit in areas, especially in windrows behind combines and stuff like that. So definitely get out there and be checking those fields and get out there and get spraying. Regarding fertilizing, if anybody hasn't fertilized their winter crops right now because they weren't concerned, they were concerned if they were going to make it or not, definitely need to get that done as well, because a lot of the winter wheat that's left out there is in the 4 to 5 leaf stage already. So definitely at a stage where if you hadn't fertilized it yet, it's definitely going to be needing it. Just a picture of a few of the weeds in some of the fields I was in this past week. You can see buckwheat doesn't look like a big plant now, but 2-leaf stage, and they get a couple more leaves, it's going to be a little bit harder to kill. We got just a picture showing a wide range of weeds coming, so they definitely are there. And give these weeds a week before you get out and spray. They're going to be 3 to 4 inches tall and starting to create issues in the field. And put this slide in not to show the weed, more of anything, just to show that anybody that had a situation where a burn-off wasn't done, and this field hadn't been planted yet, but if a burn-off wasn't done, you definitely would have issues with a lot of the weeds being very aggressive right now. You can see the thistles are big as well. And also, the reason for the slide too is for anybody that has fields that are unplanted, burn off right now is going to be critical, and it would almost pay to have that sprayer sit, the drill sit and get the burn off done, because you're going to pay for poor weed control if you try seeding into something like that and then get caught not getting a burn off done. So I guess just a warning there that if you've got some fields that aren't planted yet, that get out there, scout them, and maybe look at doing some weed control before you get out there and do some planting. As every week, I've been kind of trying to keep you up to date with the rainfall, and as well as the corn heat or growing degree days and corn heat units. This is a fairly good chart that we get once a week that comes out in the crop report that's also available on our website. And you could just see where the rainfall, especially over the past week, has brought the Boys Vein area up well above their norm. The Deloraine area, the Killarney area. So all those areas where I mentioned before that were experiencing larger amounts of moisture over the past week, which kind of slowed the drills down, has definitely become an issue. The other thing that I always like to kind of keep on top of is our growing degree days, with a lot of producers now looking at growing corn and growing soybeans. This is going to become an important issue, and we've been experiencing some cooler days, and you can see that we're kind of right in average right now in most of our areas, with anywhere from that mid to high 80s to just a little over 100% of our normal. So so we're not too far out that way. So I guess with that, I'm going to end the update for this morning, and then turn it over to Ron, and then go from there.
Okay, Ron, I just need you to click the button that says Show My Screen.
Okay, let me know when it's come up.
There you go. I can see your desktop now.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. As Lionel said, I'm the DeKalb Agronomist for Western Manitoba and Southeast Saskatchewan. Can you hear me fine there?
We've got a little bit of feedback, but go ahead. We can hear you.
Yeah, I'm gonna mute my computer out here.
Hello? We really can't. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, there. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, so when I talked to Lionel, we were talking about corn. So I was going to start off just talking a little bit about planting considerations for the beans that still have to go in. Fertilizing soybean, spraying. We'll cover briefly just the importance of the right populations as seeding gets later here. Some of the row spacing work we've done. And then I was really just going to cover the most common questions we get at this time of year as far as corn and some of the more frequent questions we get in general. So we'll start off talking about planting soybeans, interaction with date, population. Let me know if I'm going through these slides too fast here for them to catch up, I guess. So just some considerations here we put together. This was back in the winter, just talking about prime seeding windows, May 15th to 25th, and this is looking at a western Manitoba perspective maybe versus east. We're still fine in that window, but time is running out fairly soon here. We had a point during the winter making sure that the soil is warm and the air is warm enough, but the ground's good and warm now, so that's really not too much of a consideration here. Sorry?
No, go ahead.
Okay. So if conditions are right for soybeans, stop seeding other crops and get the beans in the ground, because it's far more important with the beans that they get in here right now versus some of the other crops. There is a risk to seeding early in the season, but really eventually you get the risk to going too late. One important note, make sure you're increasing your seeding rate as the date gets later here, so we should be probably starting to seed heavier and heavier here now versus if we were starting a week and a half ago, and I'll get into that here in a minute, and seed treatments can help with that as well. So one thing to keep in mind is soybeans generally start flowering around that June 21st period and the longest day of the year, and then as the days start to get shorter, it really signals the plant that they want to start flowering. And so you want to build as big a plant as you possibly can before that date and keep those bottom pods up. So early seeded plants will put on more vegetative growth than later ones. If you keep your population up, that's going to crowd them and they'll grow taller. So you'll get more vegetation growth versus a lighter population. Earlier seeding will help to raise that pod height, but as we get late again, just keep bumping your populations up. And I'm not going to dwell a lot on that first 48 hours critical time with soil temperature, because that's a lot more important, May 15th, May 10th, if the soil's still cool than it is right now. Most of the soil temperatures we've been taking the last while are pretty well 15 plus just about anywhere you go. So if it's too cold, the soybean seed needs to absorb 60% of their body weight in moisture, and it needs to be warm water. But again, the soil is warm enough now, that shouldn't be a concern. Hopefully we're past this, but we get a lot of questions about spring frost, so they'll handle a small amount of frost, about minus 2.8 Celsius for a short period of time. They're protected a little bit due to the water in the cotyledons, but if you get more than a few hours where it's colder than that, then they're probably looking at a replant, and pretty soon it would be too late to reseed soybeans. So planting depth, so this is a key. We've been getting a lot of questions here in the last while. Lots of new growers with soybeans, and a lot of people have experience with pulse crops, and are used to sowing peas 2.5 to 3 inches deep, and that's definitely a no-no with soybeans. You want to be in that 3/4 to 1.5 inches deep. The shallower they are, the quicker out of the ground. So usually right around that inch mark is probably your best bet. You'd like to plant to moisture, but you don't want to get in too deep, because you're basically pulling that seed up as they germinate. You also want to do everything you can to ensure that the soybeans can push out of the ground together. So the heavier the population, the greater the push. They're all working together to push that soil up and crack that soil and bring that big seed up as they germinate. So, narrow openers have an advantage over wider openers. Higher populations have an advantage over lower populations. And that's especially important in areas prone to crusting. So that bottom picture there, really just shows that's on a fairly wide row spacing, but because they're all crowded in there, they're all pushing up together well. So just other considerations on population, the safe recommendation, and again, I'm looking more at western Manitoba, 180 to 220,000 plants per acre. The heavier the soil, the higher the population you want, because you've got more issues with trying to get up out of the soil. Row spacing, because you've spread it out over more rows, you want to have higher population, so they're crowded a bit more. Seed treatments are definitely helping versus the way people used to sow soybeans, but again, the later the planting, higher the population. So if you get in any soybean field and you find where they're a little more crowded versus a thin spot, they're always way taller where they're crowded. So keeping them together pushes them up, gets those bottom pods off the ground a bit. And we'll get into some equipment hereafter. So we've done a number of comparisons over the last few years, comparing planters and air seeders side by side in the same field. And the slide should be coming up here, just showing some of the differences we've seen between them. So in the purple was all of our trials done with planters, and the red was all with the air seeders. So the population difference maybe wasn't what we thought we'd see. We thought we'd see a bigger difference between what you had seeded and what you hope to have for a harvest population. It wasn't as big a difference as we thought over the last 2 years. But the deviation between the two, you can see there's a lot wider range with the air seeder. So some, very good, and some, there was more loss than what they had. But it was interesting when we compared on the next slide. Bigger, really no difference between the planter and air seeder as far as getting out of the ground and emerging strong. But it was interesting the last 2 years that the air seeders have out-yielded the planters by an average of 3 bushels. And that's over a pretty large end number, 119 trials with planters and 176 with air seeders. There's a couple of shots here just showing a comparison side by side. So on the left is an air seeder at 200,000 plants per acre on 30-inch spacing, so they block some runs. You can see some variation from side to side in the row and some gaps in there versus a smaller population, 178,000 with a planter on a 30-inch row where they're all fairly uniform. And then kind of the same picture taken from the side shows that probably a little bit better. The next picture here just shows the edge of a headland on a 30-inch row. So what it's really illustrating is a very narrow opener where the soybeans are all crowded together, and you can see how they're pushing up through that heavier soil just fine there, being able to work together versus a lighter population. And one last consideration is, in general, this isn't picking on any varieties or any different brands or anything like that, but in general, with the drier fall last year, we'd felt in the winter that it was probably good to point out that seed could have been a little bit drier this year, so it was pretty important to slow the wind down on air seeders, so you're not, they're a lot more fragile than say peas would be, so keep the wind down, maybe bump up seeding rate, and use seed treatments to help with germination. Land rolling, had a lot of questions in the last week over land rolling from the people that have just finished or are about to finish soybeans. So preferred timing is usually a few days after seeding. You'd really like to have some time for that field to dry out after seeding to avoid overpacking. However, with this last rain, if the rain's going to prevent rolling the soybeans, you've already seeded till before they start to germinate, then you really need to wait till that first to third trifoliate. But you're still likely to have more damage after emergence. They can be broken once germinated and heading for the surface as well. So we don't want anyone to rush out and start packing these in too tight as once they start heading for the surface. If they are waiting to the first to third trifoliate, just make sure it's a good hot day so they're a little more flexible. But ideally, most years you'd like to be in 2 or 3 days after seeding if possible. But weather's hurting us on that this year. Row spacing, so just we get a lot of different questions about air drills and blocking runs or different spacing on planters, so I'll just share what we've found in our research trials. So over the last couple of years, this is looking at pod height off the ground. So narrow rows were the 7 to 10 inch category, mid rows were the 14 to 22 inch, and then wide rows being the planters at 30 inch. So as we got wider, your bottom pod height went up a bit, but again, that's maybe half an inch. Plant height, of course, it starts to increase pretty rapidly because you're starting to crowd them. So that one really illustrates why as you pump your populations up there, you're getting those plants up. And then seed moisture we found at harvest, the average was coming down as we went to wider rows. So we've had 2 years in a row now where it's been pretty dry through the middle of the summer. And on the wider row spacings, it looked like some of the ground was starting to dry out and the plants maybe run out of moisture. Also, maybe they'd matured a little bit faster earlier on. And then just overall, again, the yields here when we got looking at it, we talked about air seeders and planters. The narrow rows out-yielded the wide rows the last 2 years by an average of about 3 bushels, a little over 3 bushels. So it's only 2 years of data. We're not telling anyone to go out and change equipment or anything like that, but looking at stuff, if you had to make a decision over buying a flex header or going to a planter, that maybe the flex header is maybe the better investment so far. But if we get into a wetter year through the middle of the summer, that could change. That is just 2 years of data. So we'll talk about fertility. Lots of questions about fertility this spring and inoculants. So just comparing non-inoculated and inoculated. Darker green, of course, being inoculated. So soybeans, you still find a lot of people thinking that they're maybe a low input crop, but they do take a lot of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potash there to get full yield potential. So your inoculant is by far the most important thing you can look at. Make sure you're using the right strains of bacteria there for soybeans. You're not using P inoculant or something else like that. So on-seed inoculants, there's peat. That's been the most often used inoculants. Liquid is becoming more popular, but just make sure you're getting good coverage. Don't over-apply. Seed coats start to get a little fragile if you start putting on too much. And then just make sure that your inoculant is going to work fine with any seed treatments you've got on. As far as in-furrow, granular is definitely getting more popular in western Manitoba, far more use of air drills. So that's been a very easy way for people to get into it, and a great combination with those liquids and used over top of the seed. So we really recommend double inoculation on virgin soils that haven't had soybeans before. Again, your whole crop's riding on how well they're going to nodulate. So it's probably just a good practice in general. As far as if somebody actually went and sowed soybeans without inoculant or for some reason had very poor inoculation, a rescue treatment would be 50 pounds of ammonium nitrate they applied just at the start of potting. It's going to save some of the crop. You don't want to apply it too early because it's just going to grow a bigger plant and not result in any more seed, but that's by far just a rescue treatment, not no substitute for good inoculation. Just a shot showing a couple of plants with well inoculated versus no inoculants, and you can quite the difference. Phosphorus, lots of questions about phosphorus this spring. So these are the recommendations we've been using with MAFRI, 30 to 40 pounds per acre dry, never with the seed. Some people have asked about liquids applied with the seed, but really we'll leave that for people to check with their liquid fertilizer supplier. Of course, broadcast phosphate is not generally recommended. You'd like to have it down below the seed, sign banded, but a lot of caution to have anything down with the seed, so we'd rather shy away from that. So we generally would recommend people start bumping up their phosphate levels the year before in, say, their wheat crop before sowing soybeans. Potassium, never with the seed. Usually that's broadcast the year before if applied, and more of a recommendation on your sand or sandy loam type soil. So we'll get into spraying. So soybeans, not very competitive right off the bat, just like any pulse crop. So keep in mind, start clean and stay clean. So a burn down is key. Give it a good start. Prevents a lot of problems with planting and seeding. There's not a lot of herbicides you can use in them, so keep them clean. So the critical weed-free period is right from that first trifoliate up to the third trifoliate leaf stage. If you're looking at controlling volunteer Roundup Ready canola, I'll get into this in a little more depth. Pre-seed, we really endorse heat with Roundup. That's going to get you into a little, a different herbicide group, less risk of herbicide resistance. So there's a lot of group 1 and group 2 resistance around as it is, so heat gets you into a different group and works pretty effectively. Others, Clean Start, Express, there's new options potentially coming here with Authority and Volterra, and then in crop, some of your options would be Basagran, Viper ADV, Odyssey, or Pursuit. So we are doing a pretty big project this year, small plot plus field scale trials where we're comparing a number of pre-seed options and in-crop options, so you can really see the best combinations, and that'll be all set for fall. As far as the Roundup applications, we've got specific recommendations for the Roundup Ready to yield soybeans, which is probably the majority out there now. The use rate range is 0.67 liter per acre of Roundup Weather Max up to 1.89 liters per acre. The label is from first trifoliate through to flowering, but they're just as tolerant at ground crack as they are later on. Lower rate of 0.67 liter per acre may be applied once or twice. You don't want to get into those higher rates of 1.35 or 1.89 applied more than once. So that's just a one-time shot of those, and don't apply that heavy rate to non-Roundup Ready to yield soybeans. So we'd probably rather see people do a good burn-off with Roundup and heat, and then be able to come in once or twice at a little higher rate than going 3 times with lower rates. So just touch on a little bit of a topic of volunteer Roundup Ready canola. So I guess what we'd like to look at is this is kind of a systems approach in your rotation. I think Rob Golden had done some work there talking about volunteer canola management at harvest, and they'd done some work with different producers, and you can see across this chart 10 producers, quite a range of yield losses at the combine. So really the point is we can limit an awful lot of canola seed going back into that seed bank, keeping that combine running at a decent speed, having it set properly. So if you get looking at those high ones, they're up to 10% losses at harvest, and 10% yield losses on 50 bushel canola nowadays versus 25 bushel canola 15 or 20 years ago. That's quite a difference. So anything we can do to limit that can help a lot a year or two ahead of soybeans. Make sure you're swathing at the right time, and you're using seed color change as your indicator for when you should be swathing. And the other point is tillage. So Western Manitoba will maybe have a bit of an advantage, as most people are in more of a reduced or zero-till situation. You really want to avoid seed burial in the fall. So deep burial of seed promotes dormancy. Then you can see any type of canola come through for the next 4, 5, 6 years. So anything you can do to stay out of that field after the combine's off in the fall is going to help. So short of a light harrowing just to spread some straw around right behind the combine, we'd really rather see any cultivator or any kind of tillage stay out of there for at least 3 weeks after harvest if possible. A lot of the times you can get those seeds take on some moisture, start to germinate and die off in the fall, or you get predation from out there, and really you can cut that seed bank down to probably 80% of those seeds be gone in the fall if you can just leave them out there. But as soon as you till it, you could have an issue for a few years. There are pre-seed tank mix options for Roundup Ready volunteers in front of just about every crop out there right now, with cereals, corn, field peas, et cetera. So I'll touch on those a bit more. We put together weed management recommendations you can find on our roundup.ca site. If you're looking at growing soybeans, we definitely recommend Transorb or WeatherMax with heat pre-seed. Post-emergent, you've got your options of going in with a number of different things. If you have glyphosate tolerant canola in your soybeans, you could look at Viper ADV, Basagran, Pursuit, or Odyssey, and again potentially looking at other products down the road here with Volterra, Authority, other stuff like that. So I'll move on into corn. So same thing, start clean, One point we wanted to make was about timing with different herbicides. So there's at least 3 or 4 different methods that different companies use for determining leaf staging, and it's very important if you're using some of these herbicides that you're using the right leaf staging for the product they're talking about. The system we use is a new leaf is determined when it flops over, and this is actually maybe not the greatest picture showing corn at 4-leaf stage, but we're not looking at the fully off all, but really just 1, 2, 3, 4 leaves. Usually as they start to lean over, and that one leaf probably should have illustrated it better leaning over. Timing of Roundup over top of Roundup Ready corn is emergence up to 8 leaf, so it's just as tolerant at ground crack as it is right up to 8 leaf. So probably the most common thing we'd see is maybe people waiting too long. So really they should be going out when weed competition warrants, and wait a couple of weeks and then see if they need to hit things with another flush. So looking at burn off, very important prior to seeding corn. So Roundup, Weathermax, and Heat is a great option. I've had a couple of questions about Buctril M. It is registered ahead of field corn, but Roundup, Weathermax, and Heat should do a very good job and get into a different class. Less risk of resistance. One point we'd get is if you have any Roundup Ready volunteers out in the field, it's important to scout the corn early. We'd like to see people spraying that canola out when they're doing that first application. Usually when that corn's 1 or 2 leaf is when you'd like to be able to take it out. But I'm going to get into the need to check with your seed company over what you can or can't add. It's going to vary by hybrid and by seed company. The challenge and the reason we put this slide up is 95% of the questions we'd get is when they start to see yellow canola out in the field in the spring, and by that point you're probably going to live with it because you're going to do as much harm to your corn as the canola at that stage. So it's a lot more economical and effective to take out that stuff ahead of time. So if you're looking at herbicide recommendations for Roundup Ready corn, burn down should be using Roundup Transorb or Weathermax with Heat. If you had some volunteer canola, and this is over decalb corn, it's actually, I believe, on the label there now that you need to check with your seed company over what you can or can't add to individual brands. We can use light rates of 2,4-D up to the 4-leaf stage, no later, over the decalb. Buctril M is a rescue from the 4 to 6-leaf stage. And the big thing to remember here is do not go out and spray on hot, humid days with any of these, and make sure your leaf stage is right. But I can't say enough that you need to check with your own individual seed company. So again, light rates of Weathermax and 2,4-D. We'd really like to just see 1 shot early on the decalb varieties, and that's it. Check with your own individual seed company. Don't add any additional surfactants. All corn hybrids are sensitive to phenoxy, some more than others. We do phenoxy testing at our research farms just so that we can tell if there's any issues and if some hybrids need to be sprayed at lighter rates or earlier. And here's just an example of phenoxy damage. MCPA over some hybrids they're very sensitive, and this just shows the roots fused, and then of course first few good winds in the fall there, and that corn starts to go over. So make sure those hybrids are tolerant. Moving on into spray ingenuity, Roundup Ready canola. Some of the questions we generally get. One thing that we've noticed, we've been through a number of wet years in Manitoba and other spots as well, but it's kind of come up there, and we've been encouraging growers to stay on label. Don't be spraying too late. Keep the rate down. But there has been a trend as the price of herbicides gone down, and people have been forced to get into some fields and feeling that they could only get in once. Kind of the risk-reward of going higher rates and thinking they really need to control some stuff. We know that that's starting to eat into yield, so we want people to stay on label. The labeled rates haven't changed since this came out in 1996. So the labeled rates are 0.33 liter per acre of Roundup Weathermax, right from emergence up to 6-leaf. They can do that as a split application, or if they're going in once at a heavier application, it would be 0.5 liter per acre. and then again cod leading to 6 leaf. When people start to get into higher rates or going past that stage, so again we go up to 6 leaf. If they're going 0.67 of a liter at first flower, which is after our labeled rate, we've seen yield losses around 6 to 7%. Of course, if you have overlaps or people going at higher rates, this was just illustrated at double the rate, they were looking at about 12 to 13%. So it is important to stay on label. And I think the big thing to consider is under good growing conditions, probably not going to see too much if that plant isn't under any stress. But if you've got high weed pressure, maybe some frost damage, flea beetles, moisture stress, drought stress, that type of thing, it can really start to add up in addition to that. So overall, the years of working with Monsanto, probably 17 years, rarely see any herbicide issues as far as performance out there. So there's really not much need to be getting past that 0.33 liter twice. And just what you'd look for, spraying off-label symptoms, some chlorosis there if we get into higher rates. Growth reduction, that's pretty tough to see if you've got the whole field, and with the advent of GPS, we don't see the check strips out there that people used to have, so it's a little tough to see growth reduction when the whole field's sprayed evenly. And flower bleaching, and again, so that's getting into higher rates than labeled rates or going past that 6 leaf stage. So again, injury may not always be visible, but you know you're going to be fine if you're spraying on label. And probably the key point is people should be spraying as early as they possibly can. Spraying at that 1 to 2 leaf stage is probably worth 3 to 4 bushels versus that 4 to 5 leaf stage, so it's well worth spraying earlier. And again, just showing the proper timing of herbicide application, but applications were starting to get later and later, and people were putting more in as prices of herbicides went down. If you're concerned about volunteer Roundup Ready canola ahead of canola, Clean Start has been an option, and we just wanted to highlight they've just received registration that Roundup WeatherMax can now be tank mixed with straight bromoxynil for control of volunteer Roundup Ready canola prior to seeding any type of canola. So that does definitely give some other options out there. So if you're looking at any of these herbicide recommendations, you can find them under our weed management recommendations at roundup.ca, and give you a lot of the information you might look for there. And we can maybe get into some of these with questions, but the most commonly asked questions we'd get would be spraying after frost. So if you feel you've had a light frost, you probably want to wait at least a day to make sure that you haven't had any damage. Probably 2 days is better. If it's a little harder frost, check the growing points on those weeds in the crop and see how much frost damage there's been. You don't want to go out and spray the crop either right after a frost and hurt it more. Lots of questions about pH balancers and additives over the years, and Roundups and acid, so it changes the pH as soon as you add it to the tank. You're probably better adding more Roundup. 50 cents more Roundup usually does more than a lot of the different additives out there. One leaf wild oats, so I put that picture down in the middle, just showing some very, very small wild oats starting to poke through. That's less than a 1/4 inch big. A lot of time wild oats can come through in just that sheath, and there really is nothing to take up any herbicide. But that's one of the only weeds that we generally see where you probably need about 24 hours, them to be out for about 24 hours for them to be controlled. We get lots of questions about spraying over top of a crop that's starting to emerge, and the general rule is anything you can see probably is not going to be there after spraying. So please don't spray over top of a crop that's starting to come up if it's not Roundup tolerant. Setting rates for dandelions, quackgrass, etc. Just a couple of highlights there. Look with the picture of that truck in beside some quackgrass patches, and easy way to maybe set rates for quackgrass is if you can reach your arms around the patch, like the one by the front wheel there. A liter equivalent's going to do a pretty good job taking that out in the long term. Generally spraying in the spring, you want to wait for that quackgrass to be up at least 8 inches tall to get any control. So if you put your fingertips on the ground, stand your arm up. It should be up at least watch height before you're going to get any kind of decent control. Spraying earlier than that really just barely sets it back. If you get into bigger patches, kind of that 4 or 5 feet across, you want to be at least 1.5 liters equivalent, and anything bigger than truck size there, you probably need to be in at 2 liters equivalent to get any decent size control. It'll start to go a little dormant in the middle of those patches, and it might take more than one application to take that out. Dandelions, the easy rule of thumb is less than 6 inches, a liter equivalent can work pretty well. If they're all greater than 6 inches across, about 1.5 liters. And if they're all right about that 6-inch mark, 1.25 liters can work pretty well. But generally, we'd like to see people adding something to their glyphosate applications just on a herbicide resistance standpoint. Wherever you can, add a tank mix from a lower risk group of herbicides. Other questions we get: tillage intervals after spraying annual weeds or perennial weeds with glyphosate. So with an annual weed, a nice sunny day, we'd fail a day, but half a day of nice sunshine after, it's going to work just fine. Basically, you get past that rain fast window, it can generally work pretty well. Perennial weed, though, you need it to get down to the root, so you want to leave 3 full days before you go in and rip up anything there that's been sprayed, and that's 3 nice days, not cold, cloudy days. And the last one we had on was just spray intervals between glyphosate applications. Generally, there's a couple of reasons why you'd like to leave about 10 to 14 days in between applications. One, you generally don't see that stuff turn brown for 6, 7 days. After 10 days, you can make a better business decision. Do you need to get back in and do another application? But it also needs time to metabolize the glyphosate in there and get that plant back growing very rapidly there before you go and put another application over. And that bottom left picture probably shows the kind of the story that we hear at the start of June. A lot of years where people are wondering if their wild oats have died, and you can clearly see in this picture all the copper-colored dead wild oats and new flushes coming through. So it would be time to go in and do another application. If you're wondering when to apply over top of wild oats, sometimes it's good to do a scrape back in the field and see if there's a whole bunch more just about to come out. Maybe you're better to wait a day or so. But on the other side, leaving weeds for very long there, they do an awful lot of yield damage. So it's kind of weighing taking them all out versus what's coming. So with that, I guess we could open up to any questions.
Okay, Ron, yes, I do have some questions here. What wind speed are you seeing producers using with air seeders?
It really depends on the air seeder there. You'd have to go by what you think is comfortable to be able to have them flow freely, but you're not just at risk of plugging or kind of pumping them through. So it's really going to depend on all of that. They'd have to go back to their own individual machine, but.
Okay, good. With rain in the forecast, would you recommend reducing packing pressure on the drill?
That's a tough one. I farmed for long enough there that you never know if that rain's coming or not. So I'd still pack like you're dependent on the conditions you've got right then, because you never know if you are actually going to get something or not. But I know if it's wetter soil when you're going in already, you probably want to back off a little bit there, and you're not packing them down too tight.
Okay. What is the preferred?
That's the million-dollar question.
Sorry. What is the preferred mix to take volunteer RR Roundup Ready canola out of Roundup Ready soybeans?
I don't know if there is a preferred mix right now. That's why we're doing a lot of this work with small plot and field scale herbicides. There, we're really looking at the combination of say heat ahead of time or Volterra, and then the products we were testing there in crop for. We had a number of different ones here, so we'd really like to have one more year under that before we give any broad recommendations.
Okay, and when would it?
I think you really need to look.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. Oh, go ahead.
When would it be too late to plant corn?
Still there?
Oh, yes, I am. I'm sorry, maybe you missed that. When would it be too late to plant corn?
Well, for grain corn, that's our own feeling is we're probably pretty much right up at that window there right now, unless it could be in the next day or two. I think it's gonna get fairly late. The only other thing we could think of is the last couple of years we've had some fairly cool end of May, cold right up till the third week of June time period, and the crop just sat there and sat there. So if we do get some nice weather and it warms up a lot, that can help a lot. There's good moisture and the stuff's going to emerge pretty rapidly, but I'd feel better about silage corn than it better be an early maturing corn variety right now, and fairly dark ground. You know, the chance of success is definitely starting to taper off, and yields of, as you get into later May, start to fall off.
Good. Thank you, Ron. I don't have any more questions at this time. Lionel, did you have anything else?
Yeah, Linda, Ron, it's Lionel here. I just got a question for you. Over the past couple of weeks, we've had some producers that had to work up their winter wheat, and I've had a couple of guys that were wanting to go into soybeans. What would you think of an option like that? In most cases, they have their fertilizer down already for winter wheat, so that would be one of the issues that they were facing.
Yeah, if they hadn't top dressed it, that might be one thing. If they've got a lot of fertility down, then they're probably going to get fairly lazy through the summer. I guess there's the risk of not having a lot of nodulation, and by the time it's really looking for it, it might struggle later on in the season. That would be the only consideration there.
Okay, well, I guess that's all the questions I had too, Ron. So thank you again for being on the webinar. It was a lot of really good information there.
Well, and thanks for the opportunity. I left my information up there, so if somebody wants to contact me later on, that's fine. Thank you very much.
Okay, with that, just a couple of reminder slides here regarding the CCA credits. If you're viewing the recorded webinars later, we need you to write a short summary of what was discussed today, and this way we could get that information in for you so they can give you the credits for the CCA. And for those of you that were waiting for the Weed of the Week, I got kind of busy and I wasn't able to put one together today, so we'll have that for next week. If you have questions regarding anything else regarding what's going on out there, if you have questions, give us a call. There's the information for the CERS office and for myself and Linda. And then just again another slide of the FPAs in the Southwest and South Parkland area. So again, I would like to thank everybody for attending, and we will see you next week, and hopefully we don't get the monsoon rains that they're calling for tomorrow. So with that, we'll end the webinar for today.